Hi, my name is Brian Trescos. I'm the co-founder here at the Somatic Coaching Academy, and thank you so much for taking a few moments from your day to learn a little bit about core centering for hyperarousal. So we're going to do a course, very kind of brief core centering practice today, just to give you a little taste about the program, what you could be doing with your clients in your practice very easily on a daily basis. And of course, if you want to learn more about these core centering practices, come on over to Somatic Coaching Academy. Check out our next upcoming core centering practitioner training certification program. So you can do this stuff with your folks as well. All right, hyperarousal. So what is hyperarousal? So hyperarousal is really a nervous system state such that someone feels really keyed up. They really feel like their metabolism is running just way too fast, elevated heart rate, the breathing is more shallow, people feel jittery, agitated. Typically, their thoughts are racing really fast. They have a lot of emotional reactivity. Basically, they're in fight and flight. That's kind of the colloquial way that we kind of talk about this. Someone's in that fight or flight response. Their system is hyper aroused. Hyper meaning too much. Arousal is nervous system arousal. All right, so this can happen for all kinds of reasons, right? We can feel like we get activated in a certain situation. Maybe someone in our environment feels like they activate us. Maybe we're dealing with some post traumatic stressors, things of that nature that are causing that. Perhaps we live with a state of chronic anxiety that keeps us geared up, hyper vigilant, those types sorts of things. So in hyperarousal, of course, the more hyperaroused that we feel and become, the less cognitively online we are. Now, this says nothing about someone's IQ or anything like this. Listen, this is how it works. In the brain, when we're hyperaroused, there's a network of activation called the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, HPA axis. So when we are feeling activated, really what's happening is our hypothalamus, which is basically the carburetor of our nervous system, is really kind of geared up. It sends information to the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland then sends information down to the adrenal glands, and our adrenal glands liberate adrenaline and cortisol into our bloodstream. And then adrenaline and cortisol is what causes our heart rate to elevate, breathing get shallow, all the things that we kind of talked about. Now, also in the brain, when this happens, when this circuit that occurs in the limbic brain happens between the HPA axis, what it does, it kind of cuts out of that circuit the cognitive brain, what we call the prefrontal cortex, medial prefrontal cortex. That's the part of our brain that we are really organizing with, that we use to kind of witness ourselves, use to have what we call executive functions, decide, plan. It's kind of really our rational brain. So our rational brain goes offline when we experience hyperarousal. Now, if we only have a little bit of hyperarousal, sometimes cognitive practices, cognitive strategies can work to bring ourselves back into arousal. But it doesn't really take too far or kind of outside that window of optimal arousal into hyperarousal, where cognitive capabilities are actually lost, just simply because those brain centers are no longer activated. They're no longer really functioning well. Most of the brain activity is now in the midbrain, limbic brain, emotional brain centers, causing this fight or flight response. So, this is why doing somatic practices are so helpful when we talk about reducing and managing hyperarousal. So, we have a little way we talk about this in the core centering certification program. Talk about hyperarousal. Well, for a moment, just remember the last time when you were running late for something, right? You're running late for work, running late for church, for a meeting, and you get into your car and you're just like driving probably a little too fast actually, but you're driving and you're speeding along. So you're speeding along. Let's say you're on the highway doing 70 miles an hour, and let's say it's just like you can't pass or something like that. Let's say it's a two-lane road or something. Hopefully, you're not really doing this. Go along with it. Go along with the analogy here if you can. And you're going along 70, and you come up behind a school bus that's doing 40. And how do you feel when you're sitting behind that school bus? Like your engine's revving, but all of a sudden you come slowed down really fast, and you get so freaking agitated, right? So when you're go, 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 and you come up behind somebody that's going slow, 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 it's so super agitating. The reason that's agitating is because your nervous system is no longer being met with the amount of output that's happening internally. And that's essentially what happens with hyperarousal. Now, what do we do about this? So here's the thing. If you're driving along 70 and you came up behind a vehicle doing like 68, you might not even really notice it that much. And then, so you're behind 68. Now, if that car over time in front of you just slowed down a little bit more over a couple of miles to 66, you might not even notice that slow down grade. And then if they slow down more, you might not even notice that slowing. It's the abrupt change that is really disruptive and challenging and possibly even more dysfunctional when it comes to hyperarousal. So what do we do with our core centering practices? Well, let's do this together. So when we're working with people with hyperarousal, what we ask them to do first is just kind of grade their level of arousal on a scale of 0 to 10. How hyper aroused do they feel? And then we ask them to kind of meet that hyperarousal with their body. So sometimes people are kind of like pacing like a caged animal, right? So I just have them pace, have them walk back and forth. I say, meet that level of hyperarousal. How do you want to move? How much does your body want to move with that level of hyperarousal? I have people just kind of walk around, meet that level of hyperarousal in their body. All right. And then I kind of have them just, again, meet that level of hyperarousal, kind of shaking their body a little bit. Shaking. So shaking is great for venting off adrenaline and cortisol and all those kinds of things. We know it's a trauma healing reflex or trauma reorganizing reflex as well that animals do. Lots of great research around that. So have them just kind of meet, like say they feel like they're going 70 miles an hour. I said, okay, so move your body 70 miles an hour. So meet that, meet that. Okay, now that once you've met that, we do that little shaking. We do just a little bit of kind of knocking around the body a little bit. No, it doesn't have to be in anywhere in particular or anything like that. Just kind of shaking, moving, wiggling. And then take a big deep breath with folks. Big audible 70-mile-an-hour breath. Maybe if you use 50 miles an hour, maybe if you use 40 miles an hour. So I'm not saying do 70 miles an hour if you feel like your metabolism is going 50. Always meet your body where it is. Always meet your clients where they are. So you want to make sure that you're doing that. So you meet them wherever they are. So it might, for some people, it might be a little slower. Some people might be a little faster. So you meet people where they are. You have use the breath to meet people where they are. And then you just slow it down just a little bit, just a little bit, not a lot. We're not going from 70 to 40. A lot of times people are feeling really geared up and we say, okay, now just sit still and take a couple breaths. That's so irritating for the nervous system lots of times. Okay, and I actually can throw people into another whole other realm of arousal issues. So just slow it down just a little bit. Go from that 70 to 68. Another breath. 68-mile-an-hour breath. Okay, slow it down to a 66. 66-mile-an-hour breath. Good. Slow it down to 64. 64-mile-an-hour breath. Slow it down to 60. 60-mile-an-hour breath, and so on. Right? So you just kind of keep slowing it down a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And the breathing goes from being more vocal to just a little bit quieter. So it goes from a to a and we just slow it down a little bit at a time. We keep slowing it down until we feel like we're moving at a more reasonable pace. So, you can do the shaking, but you can also do this great, what we call ring the temple gong exercise. You start off going, 70 miles an hour, and then just slow it down a little bit. Same thing. Slow the breathing down just a little bit, just 2 or 5 miles an hour at a time, sort of thing. Slowing it down, slowing it down. And this could take 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Doesn't really matter how long it takes. What matters is as we have people regrade their level of arousal, is that arousal level coming down. So if they came in the room and I'm like a 10, hyper aroused, then, okay, now I'm like an 8. Okay, I'm an 8. 8's better than 10. All right, cool. Okay, now I'm slowing it down a little more, feeling like a 7, feeling like a 7. And so as we have people slow it down, we can kind of go to just these little movements. So another great movement is just what we call flowing motion. So flowing motion, you could do it fast again to meet somebody at 70 and then slow it down just a little bit at a time. And you just slow it down and until you can have a grade of your arousal scale somewhere in the middle of that 0 to 10 number, right? So if you're somewhere between like 4 and 7, something like that, you're most likely kind of coming back into a level of arousal where your brain is starting to work a little bit better. Just some slow movement, inhaling and exhaling. So these are all great things for hyperarousal. Take the movements, and movements go from being fast to the movements go to being slow and more fluid motions. Breathing goes from being really loud to a little softer. Slowly, slowly. And any kind of tapping or anything like that we're doing goes from being really fast. So if you did this for a really long time, it would actually make you more aroused. So if you just meet somebody where they are with the tapping, say, and then you slow it down, and you go all the way to just a gentle holding. And the holding tends to be more soothing and lowers that level of arousal. Ah, so the whole idea, we have all these core centering practices that we teach in the certification program, right? We have dozen movements, we have all kinds of manual techniques we teach, we have all sorts of breathing techniques and meditation practices that we teach people as a part of the core centering process. The exact order that you would best do these things in order to get a great result for folks, whether they are feeling more hyper or hypo aroused. We talk about all those states of function. We link this in with how the nervous system and trauma work together. So we make sure we're working in trauma sensitive ways with our clients. But for right now, with this whole idea of core setting for hyperarousal, the message today is meet people where they are. They're going 70, meet them at 70. Use the movements and the practices to slow down really gradually until we find someone in the middle of their window of functionality so that then they come online, they feel better, more relaxed, more productive. And if you're doing somatic coaching with people, that's your gateway in to really be able to help people do some really great somatic coaching. All right, hope this was valuable for you today. If you want to learn more about core centering, jump on over to the Somatic Coaching Academy. Check out our next core centering practitioner training program coming up really soon. Thanks. Hope to see you in class soon. Bye.